Hello, 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 hello. Good afternoon, beautiful people. What's happening? It's your girl Tiffany. I'm here live in effect. Today, I'm going to be dealing with the topic about Linda Taylor, who was considered as the welfare queen around the 1970s. Now, her story don't often get told in the mainstream, so many people may not be familiar with her, except for those who was around during the time period in the 70s and in the 80s and etc. But outside of that, not many people know about this woman and her history as a criminal in the United States, and how she was labeled as the welfare queen, and also Ronald Reagan when he was running for his presidential campaign in 1976, etc. He spoke about her and spoke about those who were committing welfare fraud. But the welfare queen term has become very derogatory, and it was really geared towards African American women, because of course, there's Black women, a large percent that receives welfare. However, they're not the main ones. The main people that are the welfare recipients are white women or white people. They are the ones that's actually the primary recipients. However, it just how media portrays Black women in a negative light when it comes to getting government assistance, and versus their white counterparts or any other racial groups of women. So Black women has always been that target of the topic about welfare and government assistance, etc. This goes back to a video that I did about social engineering and social construct and social pathology and influence. So when I go back into that, the whole concept of the social engineering, right? It can be found not just based on media, but also based on the system that's centered around oppression and racism and discrimination, which brings about social stigma. Okay. But media does play a main key role into this. Why? Because you have a concept of propaganda. So there are some information that can be true, but then there are information that can be added on just to give it a better image and be more presentable to the public's eye. So because of these propaganda that is portrayed by media, whether it be music, whether it be the movies or the news outlet, it creates the social stigma for a group of people that has been oppressed by the system in itself. So, but anyway, Linda Taylor had a history of being a criminal, and she was involved in kidnapping, fraudulent, possibly murder. It was a lot of things. So what I'm going to do before I get into her story, I want to put up the information about welfare and how long welfare been around as far as the history. So that's what I want to get into. Then I can get into her story, and then I can show other videos and show statistics proving that who is the highest of the welfare recipients as far as ethnic groups are concerned. So that's what I want to do. So let's go ahead and get started on the social welfare programs. Okay, if y'all can see. So right here under the history. Now let's look at the history of the social programs in the United States. The first large-scale social policy program in the United States was assistance to Union Civil War veterans and their families. The program provide pensions and disability assistance from 1890 to the early 1920s. The U.S. provided what Theodore Scruple characterized as maternalist policies, as it provided pensions for widowed mothers. Historically, the United States has spent less on social welfare than European countries, but only in terms of gross public social welfare spending. The United States tended to tax lower income people at lower rates and relied substantially on private social welfare programs. After taking into account taxation, public mandates, and private spending, the United States in the late 20th century spent a higher share on combined private and net public social welfare relative to GDP than did most advanced economies. Spending varied between different states in the United States. So, therefore, there was a form of public assistance social welfare programs. However, it was geared to those who were military veterans and their families. And when they did start off with these programs for women, it was mainly those who were widows with children. So, of course, you know who the first recipient was. The primary recipients were white women, because Black people, they were the last to receive anything. And it was very hard for Black people to get some type of government assistance. So white people were the primary ones getting them in the beginning. Okay, so that would explain the whole notion about when Black women did receive government assistance or start receiving them, how the social worker would come into the homes and check the homes and make sure that there's no man in the house or whatnot, because the main purpose was to assist the mother who had children. So single mothers with children or widow mothers. That's it. It wasn't to cater to the whole entire family, because the government wasn't trying to take care of the whole entire family. The government looked at it like, if there's a man in the house, what's the purpose of us offering assistance if you got the man around? But when there is no man in the house and there is no help, and the woman is doing it as a single parent, then that's when the government will offer assistance. Okay? And a lot of times, especially as Black women, they get ridiculed by Black men for receiving government assistance. But here's the thing. There are those women who need it, especially as single parents, because many people are not getting paid a certain type of income. So it depends on what type of work you're doing. And it depends on the cost of living. So at some point in time, yeah, the woman's going to need assistance. Okay? Now, it'd be different if she was just doing things and she was not really, she didn't need it for the sake of the children, but she was only doing it just for her own personal benefits. Then yes, that could be an argument. But if you got women who is actually in need and they're not really getting the help or getting the support system, then yeah, they're going to turn to the government for help. And I see that a lot with, especially Black men. There's a lot of ridiculing and there's a lot of criticism regard to Black women getting government assistance. If it's needed and it's necessary, then yes, you have no other choice. Because if you're not getting help elsewhere, then who else are you going to get help from? But if she doesn't need it and she's only doing it for her own personal benefits, then there could be an argument. That could be an argument right there. But anyways, let me continue. So let's look at the federal welfare programs. So as you can see, colonial legislator and later state governments adopted legislation pattern after the English poor laws, aid to veterans, often free grants of land and pension for widows and handicapped veterans, have been offered in all U.S. wars. Following World War I, provisions were made for a full-scale system of hospital and medical care benefits for veterans. By 1929, workers' compensation laws were in effect in all but for 4 states. These state laws made industry and businesses responsible for the costs of compensating workers or their survivors when the worker was injured or killed in connection with his or her job. Retirement programs for mainly state and local government paid teachers, police officers, and firefighters date back to the 19th century. Okay? All these social programs were far from universal and varied considerably from one state to another. Prior to the Great Depression, the United States had social programs that mostly center around individual efforts, family efforts, church charities, business workers' compensation, life insurance, and sick leave programs, along with some state tax-supported social programs. The misery and poverty of the Great Depression threatened to overwhelm all these programs. The severe depression of the 1930s made federal action necessary, as neither the states and the local communities, businesses and industries, nor private charities had the financial resources to cope with the growing need among the American people. Beginning in 1932, the federal government first made loans, then grants to states to pay for direct relief and work relief. After that, special federal agency relief like Civilian Compensation Corps and other programs were started. In 1935, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration proposed to Congress federal social relief programs and a federally sponsored retirement program. Congress, followed by the passage of 37-page Social Security Act, signed into law August 14, 1935, and effective by 1939, just as World War II began. This program was expanded several times over the years. Economics historians led by Price Fishback have examined the impact of New Deal spending on improving health conditions in the 114 largest cities, 1929 to 1937. They estimated that every additional $153,000 in relief spending in 1935 dollars or $2.3 million in 2019 dollars was associated with a reduction of 1 infant death, 1 suicide, and 2.4 deaths from infectious disease. All right, so as you can see, the welfare program started to really develop more into focusing on the citizens, not from okay. The welfare program went from focusing on the military veterans and their family to focusing on those who were impoverished or stayed in the inner city communities or who were very poor. So when Franklin D. Roosevelt came in, he expanded it. He actually added on to these social programs by introducing the New Deal. So you had the first New Deal and you had the second New Deal. So the first New Deal, of course, was dealing with the veterans and also dealing with the mothers and the widows, etc. Right? But the third deal was also bringing about social security, supplemental programs for people who are disabled, and also public housing projects, public works for people who want to get an opportunity to work for the government, and also the whole welfare system, the government system, which at that time was called Aid of Dependent Families, or was it Aided Dependent Children and Families, or however, whatever the abbreviation is. But at that time, it was before they changed the name to TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistant Needy Family, right? Before they changed it to that, it was aid dependent families, or aiding family with dependent children. So yeah, I'm gonna go into the whole ordeal of the Welfare Reform Act of 1996 and why President Bill Clinton signed the law into effect, and what was his whole purpose, etc. So, but I just want to like kind of give an idea of what the social welfare program is about. Hello, Dominant Man. How are you today? I am well. Thank you for asking, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. But let's go ahead and get into the main topic. So let's look up Linda Taylor. Who was she? And how did she become the face of the welfare queen? Thank you. All right, check this out. So Linda Taylor, who was born Martha Louise White on around January 1926, because they don't have her exact birthday, and she died April the 18th of 2002. She was an American woman who committed extensive welfare fraud, and after the publication of an article in the Chicago Tribune in fall of 1974, became identified as the welfare queen. Accounts of Taylor's activity were used by then presidential candidate Ronald Reagan for his 1976 presidential campaign onwards to illustrate his criticism of social programs in the United States. Her criminal activities are believed to have extended beyond welfare fraud and may have included assault, theft, insurance fraud, bigamy, kidnapping, and possibly even murder. So what is bigamy or bigamy? I never heard this term before. All right, so in culture where monogamy is mandated, bigamy is the act of entering into a marriage with one person while still legally married to another. A legal or de facto separation of the couple does not alter their marital status as married persons. In the case of a person in the process of divorcing their spouse, that person is taken to be legally married until such time as the divorce becomes final or absolute. Under the law of relevant jurisdiction, bigamy laws do not apply to couples in a de facto or cohabitation relationship, or that enter such relationship when one is legally married. If the prior marriage is for any reason void, the couple is not married, and hence each party is free to marry another without falling foul of the bigamy laws. Bigamy is a crime in most countries that recognize only monogamous marriages. When it occurs in this context, often neither the first or nor second spouse is aware of the other. In countries that have bigamy laws, with a few exceptions such as Egypt and Iran, consent from a prior spouse makes no difference to the legality of the second marriage, which is usually considered void. Okay. So at that time period, basically, bigamy, it was illegal to be married to one person and then turn around and get married to somebody else while you're still legally married to another individual. So I guess that's what she was doing. She was legally married to someone else, and then she was entering into a relationship and getting married to another individual. So yeah. Okay, I get it. Cool. Anyways, identity and early life. So Taylor was born to Lydia Mooney White in Gold Dust, Tennessee, a few months after White moved there from Summit, Alabama. Although no birth certificate was issued, biographer Josh Levin estimates, based on other details provided by Taylor's relative, that the birth probably occurred in January of 1926. At birth, she was named Martha Louise White. In October of 1926, Lydia White married Joseph Jackson Miller, and subsequent United States Census records listed Martha Louise Miller as their daughter. The identity of Taylor's biological father is uncertain. In census records and court testimony, her relative gave varying information about her parentage, but always identified her as white. Rumors in the family indicate that her father was black, but Lydia White could have been convicted of a felony under Alabama's law against interracial relationships if she admitted this. Because back then, during the 50s, or during the 20s, all the way up to the 60s, it was considered illegal to have interracial relationship. So maybe she did not want to identify her child as being African or being of black descent, because she knows that if she would have done that, and I'm talking about Linda Taylor's mother, if Linda Taylor's mother would have told the law that her daughter was biracial and she had a relationship with a black man, then she would have been punished. She would have been in trouble, because it was illegal to have interracial marriages and interracial relationships. It was illegal in the South. So that was a felony. It was a crime. So that's why Linda Taylor grew up with this identity crisis, because she didn't really know how do she really identify herself. And she didn't really know that, of course, she was black, obviously, because she had a white mother. So by her having a white mother, her white mama didn't tell her much about her daddy or give into the background because of how the law was back then. She probably didn't want her to know that she was black or she had African descent, because it would have been punishable. But that didn't change anything, because obviously them white folks knew later on that, well, she is biracial and then her daddy is a nigga. So that's why, and otherwise she would never got treated the way that she did. So she didn't obviously have all the privilege, because if she really had all the privilege, she would not be targeted as the welfare queen because of the fact that she was African descent. So she really wasn't getting all that privilege. But let's continue. All right. So it says, throughout her life, Taylor presented herself as being of various racial and ethnic identities, including Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Jewish. Taylor represented herself as being many different ages, with one government official stating in 1974 that it appears she can be any age she wishes, from the early 20s to the early 50s. Although she became known under the name Linda Taylor, news reports indicated that she used as many as 80 different names, often with false identification documents to match. Her aliases included Linda Bennett, Connie Jarvis, Linda Jones, Constance Lloyd, Linda Lynch, Linda Maliso, Linda Ray, Constance Rain, Linda Shovia, Linda Taylor, Constance Wakefield, and Connie Walker. Her many identities, including using the title Reverend and posing as a nurse, a doctor, and a spiritual advisor who used Haitian voodoo. So far, this woman had multiple names that she went by. Or Alice. She went by Linda Taylor. She didn't go by using her real name. She went by multiple names, but she did not use her real name. And she played multiple roles too. She disguised as a nurse, a spiritual advisor, a doctor. So she was getting away with being a con artist for the longest until the gang caught up with her. Now let's talk about her arrest trial and the media coverage. So on August 8th of 1974, Taylor filed a police report claiming that she has been robbed of $14,000 in cash, jewelry, and furs. Chicago detectives Jack Sherwin and Jerry Cush took the report, recognized her from a similar previous report, and she came under suspicion for false identifying, for which she was later charged. Additionally, Taylor was suspected of welfare fraud after Sherwin found welfare payments checks made out to multiple different names in her apartment. Upon investigating her, Sherwin discovered Taylor was wanted on welfare fraud charges in Michigan. She was arrested at the end of August of 1974 for possible extradition to Michigan. Released on bond, Taylor fled the state and was a fugitive until October the 9th of 1974, when she was caught in Tucson, Arizona, while the detectives had problems gaining the interest of the offices of both the state and federal attorneys. The media in the Chicago area became receptive to what the detectives told them. The case was used in conflicts among members of the Illinois State Legislature and between Governor Dan Walker and his opponents, with the Taylor case being cited to support of claims about welfare fraud being out of control. Upon her return to Illinois, prosecutors opened a 31-count indictment against Taylor for fraud, perjury, and bigamy, alleging that she had received welfare and Social Security checks under multiple names. Her attorney, R. Eugene Pitcham, managed to delay the trial until March 1977, by which time the charges had been considerably reduced. Initial allegation involving 80 Alice's and over $100,000 in fraudulently obtained funds had been narrowed to charges involving $8,000 obtained through 4 Alice's and charges of perjury in her testimonies before a grand jury. The bigamy charges were dropped. After a trial lasting less than 3 weeks, the jury deliberated for about 7 hours before finding her guilty on March 17th of 1977. Taylor was sentenced to imprisonment for 2 to 6 years on the welfare fraud charges and a year on the perjury charges. To be served consecutively, she began her sentence at the White Correctional Center on February 16, 1978. So Ronald Reagan, as a presidential candidate in 1976, regularly made claims about the welfare state being broken and repeatedly alluded to the Linda Taylor case, although he did not refer to her by name. At campaign rallies in January 1976 during the New Hampshire primary, Reagan claimed her income had been $150,000 a year, a figure which was derived from a Chicago Tribune report in October, by which time he had lost the Republican nomination to Gerald Ford. Reagan said in a radio broadcast to voters that her take is estimated at $1 million, a claim which, according to her biographer, Josh Levin, appears to be unsourced. Other claims Reagan made about her 3 new cars, including a Cadillac, were true. Her fraudulent claims has since been estimated at $40,000 over a number of years. However, she was only charged with stealing about $8,000 because of difficulty with assembling verifiable evidence. All right, so other suspected crimes. Taylor is suspected of being the woman who posed as a nurse and abducted an infant. Paul Joseph Forzak from the Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago in the late April 1964, Taylor's son has said that his mother frequently took other people's children, and law enforcement also suspected her in the case. But the abduction of Paul Frankelzak was never solved. Following genetic testing, Frankelzak was found to be living in Michigan in December of 2019. Taylor was believed to be a kidnapper and possibly a murderer, but these offenses were never properly substantiated through an investigation. 3 people she knew well in the 1970s and 1980s died under suspicious circumstances. So years later, Taylor was released from prison on parole on April the 11th, 1980. Her parole was completed on May the 26th, 1981. Taylor rejoined Sherman Ray, whom she had married shortly before her arrest in 1974. And on August 25th of 1983, Ray was shot by Wiltrue Lloyd in what was later ruled to be an accident. Taylor collected on Ray's life insurance. Lloyd and Taylor moved to Florida and subsequently married in March of 1986. When Lloyd died in 1992, Taylor, under the alias Linda Lynch, was listed as his next of kin, but claimed to be his granddaughter rather than his wife. Taylor died of a heart attack on April the 18th, 2002 at Egalis Memorial Hospital outside Chicago. Her remains were cremated. So there was a twisted plot to that storyline. So here it is. She marries a man later after she got out of prison. Then he gets killed by another man whom she ended up marrying. No, wait a minute. Before he got killed, right? Okay, she married this man. He ended up getting killed by this other man. She collected life insurance policy. Once she collected his life insurance policy, then her and that other guy who killed her husband, they end up getting married, and this guy dies, and she was the next in line to collect some benefits from him. So instead of claiming as his wife, she claimed it as to be his granddaughter. And she eventually passed away in 2002 from heart attack. So the question that one may ask is, well, was the death of her husband, her first husband, was his death, was it an accident, or was it motivated? Was it an accident or was it motivated? Was she behind all of that? Did she orchestrate that whole crime? Did she orchestrate to where this man can end up getting killed by another man, and then so that way she could collect the life insurance benefit or the life insurance policy and be able to live the rest of her life with this other guy and wait till he dies to collect the benefits? Because that's what I'm guessing. They saying in this article, in the Wikipedia article, and I'm going to show it. In this Wikipedia article, it says that it was ruled to be an accident, but it does not sound like an accident to me. It sounds more so like it was orchestrated, that she was behind the plight. She was behind this murder. So she orchestrated this activity to happen in order to make it look like it was an accident when it really wasn't. But all she wanted to do was collect some life insurance and got married to the other guy so she could move on, live happily ever after with the other guy and wait till he dies and to take his income and live off of it for the rest of her life. So yeah, it is just something I just want to point out in this paragraph because it doesn't line up. It doesn't really add up how that murder was rooted to be an accident. But anyways, that's the story about Linda Taylor. As a matter of fact, I want to show you guys the picture of her real quick. All right, so that's a picture of Linda Taylor. That's a picture of her. Yep, so that's all the information. There's books pertaining to her life and the whole concept of the welfare queen. So before I get into the concept of what the welfare queen is, I want to show you guys some books that you guys can read on your own term. So this book right here is called The Queen, The Forgotten Life Behind an American Myth. So it goes into the life about Linda Taylor, and not only it gives the account, but it also speaks on the term about welfare queen. So if you guys want to check this book out, it's written by Josh Levin. You can check it out, and I'm trying to see when was it written, what year. So it was written in 2019. That's when this book was written, in 2019. So it's been about almost 2 years ago. So it's 2021. So this been about almost 2 years ago. All right, and that's a picture of Linda Taylor. Well, a little fur coat on, she got a hat on, she got gloves on, and all of that. Yep. Then I have another book which solely focuses on the term and the social stigma behind it, which is The Politics of Disgust, the Public Identity of the Welfare Queen. All right, this book was written by Angie Marie Hancock, The Public Identity of the Welfare Queen. This book was written in 2004. So you can check it out at your public library. You can go on Amazon and you can download it on your Kindle. You can download it on or you can purchase the book from the Amazon website. You can go to Barnes and Nobles. They probably got it. Mm-hmm. And then there is another book here. It's called Ghettos, Down and Out on the Silver Screen. Ghetto, Tramp, and Welfare Queens. Written by Stephen Pimpar. And this one was written in 2017. So it basically goes into the stereotype and social stigma about the ghettos, about the tramps. And if y'all know what the tramps is, I don't think I need to elaborate on what a tramp is. And the welfare queen. So the different movies that has shown depictions of ghetto life, tramps, welfare queens, basically dealing with the propaganda, of course, and also which creates the negative stereotypes and the social stigma, which in different class and various groups of people in those classes. All right. So let me go ahead and go back to the concept of what the welfare queen is. Let's look that up real fast. So, welfare queen is a derogatory term used in the United States to refer to women who allegedly misuse or collect excessive welfare payments through fraud, child endangerment, or manipulation. Reporting on welfare fraud began during the early 1960s, appearing in general interest magazines such as Reader's Digest or Digest. The term originates from media reporting in 1974 and was popularized by Ronald Reagan beginning with his 1976 presidential campaign. Since then, the phrase welfare queen has remained a stigmatizing label and is most often directed towards Black single mother. Therefore, it is considered racist by many, although women in the U.S. could no longer stay on welfare indefinitely after the federal government launched the Temporary Assistance for Needy Family program in 1996. The term remains a trope in the American dialogue on poverty and negatively shape welfare policies and outcomes for these families. So, of course, it goes into the origins. So the idea of welfare fraud goes back to the early 1960s when majority of known offenders were males. Despite this, many journalistic exposés were published at the time on those who would come to be known as welfare queens. Reader's Digest and Look magazine published sensational stories about mothers gaming the system. The term was coined in 1974 either by George Blitz of the Chicago Tribune in his articles about Linda Taylor or by Jet magazine. Neither publication credited the other in their welfare queen stories of that year. Taylor was ultimately charged with committing $8,000 in fraud and having 4 aliases. All right, anyways, it says accounts of her activities were used by Ronald Reagan beginning with his 1976 presidential campaign, although he never identified her by name or race. And of course, I already read that earlier, so there's no need for me to do that. Anyhow, used to illustrate his criticism of social programs in the United States, Reagan employed the trope of the welfare queen in order to rally support for reform of the welfare system during his initial bid for the Republican nomination in 1976 and again in 1980. Okay, so it says some of these stories and some that followed into the 1990s focused on female welfare recipients engaged in behavior counterproductive to eventual financial independence, such as having children out of wedlock using AFDC money to buy drugs or showing little desire to work. These women were understood to be social parasites, draining society of valuable resources while engaging in self-damaging behavior. Despite these early appearances of the welfare queens, icon stories about able-bodied men collecting welfare continued to dominate discourse until the 1970s, at which point women became the main focus of welfare fraud stories. Then, of course, it says gender and racial stereotypes. So, political scientist Franklin Gilliman has argued that the welfare queen stereotype has roots in both race and gender. While poor women of all races get blamed for their impoverished condition, African American women committed the most egregious violation of American values. This storyline taps into stereotypes about both women, uncontrolled sexuality, and African American laziness. The trope of the welfare queen may be analyzed from the framework of intersectionality to better understand how race, class, gender, and other identities shape individual and groups' privilege and disadvantages. The media image of poverty shifted from focusing on the plight of white Appalachian farmers and on the factory closing in the 1960s to a more racially divisive and negative image of poor blacks in urban areas. All of this, according to political scientist Mark Gylens, led to the American public dramatically overestimating the percentage of African Americans in poverty. And by 1973, in magazine pictures depicting welfare recipients, 75% feature African Americans, even though African Americans made up only 35% of welfare recipients and only 12.8% of the U.S. population. In 2016, African Americans made up 39.6% of welfare recipients, and in 2015, African Americans made up 13.3% of the United States population. Van Dorn states that the media repeatedly shows a relationship between lazy, black, and poor, suggesting why some Americans are opposed to welfare programs. From the 1970s and onward, women became the predominant face of poverty. And in a 1999 study by Franklin Gilliman that examines people's attributes on race, gender, and media, and 11 minutes news clip featuring one of two stories on welfare was shown to two groups of participants. Each story on welfare had a different recipient. One was a white woman and the other one was a black woman. The results showed that people were extremely accurate in their recall of the race and gender of the black female welfare recipient in comparison to those who saw the story with the white female welfare recipient. This outcome confirmed that this unbalanced narrative of gender and race had become a standard cultural bias, and that Americans often made implicit association between race, gender, and poverty. All right, furthermore, research conducted by Jennifer, skipping it. Additionally, some believe that black single women on welfare are irresponsible in their reproductive decision and may continue to have children to weak welfare benefits. However, as analyzed from the United States General Accounting Office data, there is no greater likelihood of these occurrences with women on welfare. It says the welfare queen stereotype is driven by the false and racist beliefs that places the blame of the circumstances of poor black single mothers as the result of their own individual issues, bringing forward racial tropes such as their promiscuity, lack of structure and morals, and avoidance of work, with primary narratives regarding poverty being driven by the myth of the meritocracy, or in other words, of the ideologies that are centered in self-reliance and hard work being enough to pull oneself out of poverty. The welfare queen trope illustrates the result of adding racial and gender dimensions to these inaccurate claims. In addition to work ethic, family values such as heteronormative working two-parent household and having children only when married are seen as the cultural standard. As a result, deviations from this ideal constitute a lower social value. By stereotyping single black mothers as welfare queens, the interpersonal, structural, and institutional barriers that prevented adequate resources and opportunities for them, which led to or reinforced poverty, are not addressed. Instead, the blame goes towards the perceived cultural or personal inferiority of the women and their dysfunctional families, further harming their chances of poverty reduction and the expansion of their capabilities. That sound all too familiar to me. It sound all too familiar because to this day, Black women are still being blamed. And it's not really by white folks. Guess who blaming Black women the most? Black men. We still have this conversation now. It's not to take away the accountability that Black women should have for their behavior and for the things they do. But overall, when it comes to the issue and the crisis of the Black community, it's like the Black woman becomes that sinner. She becomes the scapegoat. She becomes the villain of the Black community. And I still cannot fathom that to this day. It's like, how does she become the scapegoat of all the crisis going on in the Black community? Well, it's because she gives birth to children. Is it because of the single parenting? I mean, is it because how the kids raised? I mean, it'd be different if she raised the kids a certain way and that's their behavior. But I tell people all the time that a parent can't control everything what their children are doing. So you have to realize that it's not always about how the parents raise their kids. It's more so about what their kids are influenced by. So you can be a very great productive parent. You can do everything right, making sure your kids get the proper education, making sure that your kids are very secured and safe, going into extracurricular activities. You can always teach your morals and standards or whatnot. But once they step outside in the world and once they start interacting with other children, they're going to be dealing with peer pressure. They're going to become influenced by what's on the media. They become influenced by what they see other people doing. So it's more so of a society thing. So after all, we all are a product of a society because of the cultural norms that's taking place. And the cultural ideas. So because of the cultural idea, it reflects back to what? The philosophical ideas or the philosophy. So we have been influenced as African Americans by the Western culture. And what I mean by the Western culture, that means the European culture. So all of the things that we have learned as African Americans in this country, we learned it just by being in the European culture, in the Western society. We are a product of this Western society because if you go back into our history, and I'm not making an excuse and justifying behaviors that is happening, but we have to look at the origin. We have to pull back the layers. And when you pull back the layers, you will see why there's so much deviance, tabooism, and so much criminal activity, social pathology, social engineering, social influence, social stigmas, because it has its origin. That's why you have people like Linda. That's why you have people like Linda Taylor. Linda Taylor is a byproduct of those in the South who were not only racist, but also created narratives against other groups of people as far as not just financially, not just as far as living standards is concerned, but also relationship-wise. So because she was born in an interracial family, right, that draw the line with her. And then on top of that, she didn't know what date she was born because many Black people or those who were African descent, they didn't have access to Social Security and birth certificates. My grandmother was one of them. Okay. My grandmother was born and raised in the country. She didn't have access to her birth certificate. So she didn't really know exactly like what year she was born or what date. So we always thought that her birthday was October 22nd of 1936. But then we were told later on, I was told that that was not really the case. There could be a possibility that she was born a little earlier than that. But she did not exactly know when her birthday was. She didn't have a birth certificate to verify that. So the point that I'm getting at is we are a byproduct of this society. So when you are a byproduct of a society, of a culture, especially a culture that's predicated upon an economic system like capitalism, there's going to be a lot of shit that's going to be taking place. There's going to be a lot of deviance and behaviors going on. There's going to be a lot of hypocrisy going on. As I mentioned, humans are a walking contradiction. What do I mean by walking contradiction? Humans can say one thing, right? They can tell other groups of human beings to be moral, to have class, and to have values, but don't practice that themselves, or don't put it into work, don't bring about the pragmatism. So therefore, you're living under the idea of this is who you got to be, but everybody else don't live that way. Okay? So it's all based on the culture and the society that you come from, the environment that you come from, which can influence a person's thought and their behavior. Now, yes, over time, people can develop themselves. People can learn different things. But you're not going to be able to totally detach yourself from a system that you was raised in. You're not going to be able to detach yourself from a social stigma. That's going to stay with you. That's going to be stuck with you for the rest of your life. That's not something that you're going to ever forget. So people that been through the Jim Crow era, people that went through the Reconstruction era, yeah, they may have been freed. Yeah, they may have earned rights, but guess what? They did not forget what has happened to them or their loved ones and what they had to witness, because to this day, it still does something to the psychology. Why? Because it's been passed on down to the next generation, which is dealing with epigenetics. But that's a whole nother topic. Epigenetics like goes into the science of all of that. But anyways, you create a dysfunction and you create a psychological behavior, and which creates a social behavior. So through social stigma, if you speak something into existence, then guess what? It's going to be existent. So if you tell somebody, if you tell a child you bad as hell, you a badass little fucker, and you keep speaking that into that child existence and to their psyche, guess what? They're going to think, oh, I'm a bad motherfucker. I'm bad as hell. And they're going to start to program that and start to act on that deviant behavior, because that's what they've been told growing up, that they were bad as hell and they were some bad little fuckers. And they're going to remember that it's going to be programmed into their psyche. So same way when black people were socially stigmatized by white folks and were told that they were niggers, they were minorities, if they were not welcome here, they was Jezebels, they were jigaboos, they were lazy. That was programmed into them. And they started believing that that's what they were. They was a bunch of bitches and hoes. They start to believe that. They start to carry on that attitude that this is what I am. I guess this is what I am because they say that's what I am. I'm a thug because that's what they were called. They didn't call themselves thugs at one time, but because of the social stigma, they carried on that idea. I'm a real bitch. I'm a bad bitch. That social stigma. But I ain't gonna Okay, I'm gonna stop right there. But let's go ahead and look up more information about. Let's look at the statistics, because I want to get into the statistic about the welfare. You said the European culture is very great. Dominic, dude, no, dude, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't come over here with that, dude. Stop it. Stop it. Don't do that. This clown over here talking about the European culture is very great. Come on, stop it. Cut it out. I can tell you not very studious enough, because you wouldn't say such a thing. Anyways, going into the whole concept about the statistics and welfare for 2021, which is now. Now, as many of us know, we have been dealing with the pandemic, and the pandemic has really greatly affected a lot of us, especially those who are essential workers, because hours been cut. Events hasn't been going or taking place. A lot of businesses has been shut down. There's some businesses that have not been able to gain access to PPP loans. And then there's just those that just don't operate on the hours they used to. So let's go ahead and look down to where it says important welfare statistics for 2021. Right here it says million Americans face the financial hardship of losing a job, not being able to work due to disability, or supporting a family on a small salary each year. The struggle to put food on the table, pay bills, and support a family can be incredibly harsh, which is why the United States has a series of welfare programs to those in need. And of course, it goes into the history about the federal welfare program, started in 1935 during the Great Depression. All right, today the means-tested welfare system consists of government programs that offer cash, food, social services, education, training, and housing for low-income Americans. As welfare programs are funded through local, state, and federal taxes, programs are often a topic of political debate. It says, with some misconceptions surrounding the American receiving welfare and effectiveness of the program, we've compiled important welfare statistics you should know in 2021. Explore the causes, effects, and various demographic statistics in our studies of the welfare programs in America. So, of course, as you can see, the cost of welfare programs in 2020, a total of $9.88 trillion was spent on welfare programs in America, and you can find the source on U.S. government spending. Then you also got in 2021, $8.30 trillion is projected to be spent on welfare programs in America. Source, the U.S. government spending. And then 4.83 trillion in the total is budget for federal spending specifically in 2021. And then under here, scrolling down, 2.09 trillion of total is estimated to be budget for state spending specifically in 2021, and 2.18 trillion of dollars of the total is estimated to be budget for local spending specifically 2021. 8% of total government spending in 2019, $361 billion went towards welfare programs in 2019, excluding Social Security benefits. The average SNAP recipient, which used to be food stamp, but now it's called SNAP, or also known as EBT. Anyways, the average SNAP recipient in 2020 earned $136.36 a month in assistance, and the source is USDA. Around 38,006. Was it 38,000? Oh, hold on. Yeah, 38,066,477 million people participated in SNAP in 2020, and the total U.S. spending on SNAP in 2020 amounted to 36 billion and 335,896,388. That's a lot of money. Okay. So anyways, you guys get that part. So here's the diagram of the estimate of 2021 welfare spending in America. As you can see, most of the spending is in Medicaid, which is $448.1 billion. Okay. And then the second highest is $274.7 billion. That's under Family and Children's Assistance. And then on top of that, the third highest is Housing Assistance, which is $54.2 billion. Then the fourth highest is $33.2 billion under unemployment. Then the last one is $3 billion under workers' compensation, etc. All right, so as you can see, these are legitimate sources and legitimate information that can be found. As a matter of fact, you look under poverty statistics. So in 2020, the poverty threshold for a couple with 2 children was $17,240, and that's under ASPE. And then right here where it says Mississippi has the highest number of people living in poverty in 2020, 20.6% of states resident. 20.6% of the state's resident. So that's World Population Review. So yes, Mississippi happens to be one of the poorest states in the United States. All right, so as you can see, the top 10 states with the highest poverty rates in 2021. All right, so under here where it says welfare fraud statistics. Welfare fraud is the act of improperly stating or withholding information in order to receive higher payments. And it says the United States Government Accountability Office estimate that around 1 out of 10 welfare payments are fraudulent or improperly filed. All right, so So it says fraudulent and improper welfare payments were around 10.6% of total federal welfare payments made in 2019. So federal safety net. So let's look under this website. This website is called Federal Safety Net. Man, why did I do that? God. All right, so right here it says welfare fraud. Improper welfare payments include frauds and are estimated to be 15.6% of all federal welfare payments made in total $129 billion in fiscal year 2020. This estimate is based on reports from the Office of Management and Budget. The Federal Account Office, GAO, and Inspector general report, 7 of the welfare programs make the OMB list of high priority programs. Programs with improper payments greater than $2 billion annually. Information and sources data by program are shown below. Total welfare improper payments and fraud of $129 billion is an enormous sum, greater than the entire budget of TANF, Children Nutrition, Head Start, Job Training, WIC, Child Care, and LEHEAP, and the Lifeline Programs combined. Explanation by OMB and GAO of the causes of improper payments are shown below by welfare programs. As you can see, so right here it says billions in spent improper payments percentage. So Medicaid is 21.3%. Refundable tax credit is 23.5%. And the percentage for food stamp is 7.4%. Housing assistance is 1.0%. And SSI is 9.4%. So the improper payment, which make up the highest, is refundable tax credit and Medicaid. That's very interesting to me. And it says the reason why is because this is a high priority program as classified by the OMB for Medicaid. OMB described the root causes of the errors as following: the administrative or processing errors made by state or local agency, inability to authenticate eligibility, inability to access data. And then refundable tax credit are made up of EITC and child tax credit. OMB reports a 23.5% improper payment rate for the EITC program and 11.5% rate for the child tax credit program in FY 2020. So basically it's due to error as follow: inability to authenticate eligibility, data needed does not exist. Wow. All right, so that's that information about the welfare fraud. So anyways, going on to the next, who makes up the highest number of those that are in poverty? So right here, I have information from the Center for American Progress, The Basic Facts About Women in Poverty by Robin Billyways, Diana Beauchamp, Alexandria Qualtron Gaines, August the 3rd of 2020. This fact sheet contains a correction. Now, they just updated on the information. Check this out. It says in the United States, more women than men live in poverty. According to the U.S. Census Bureau data of the 38.1 million people living in poverty in 2018, 56% or 21.4 million were women. The coronavirus pandemic had put individuals and families at an increased risk of falling into poverty in the United States as they face greater economic insecurity due in large part of unprecedented unemployment that has disproportionately affected women. Congress emergency unemployment assistance during the first few months of the pandemic staved off a predicted spike in the poverty rate. Federal economic support must be extended throughout the duration of this fluctuating crisis to prevent an increase in the number of families living in poverty in the long term. All right, so it says the following facts present a snapshot of women in poverty, explain why women experience higher rates of poverty, and explore the policy solution that can be best ensure lasting economic security for women and their families. All right, so it says federal poverty line and imperfect measurement of poverty. So the poverty estimates included in this fact sheets are based on the federal poverty line, or the minimal annual income for individuals and families determined by the United States government to pay for necessities. In 2018, the poverty line was set in annual income of $13,064 for a single individual younger than age 65, and $25,465 for a family of four with two adults and two children. All right, so check this out. It says race and ethnicity. It says women experience higher rates of poverty than men in 2018. 12.9% of women living in poverty compared with 10.6% of men. Nearly 10 million women lived in deep poverty, defined as falling below 50% of the federal poverty line. Race and ethnicity. Women of nearly all races ethnicity face higher rates of poverty than their male counterparts. The highest rates of poverty are experienced by American Indian or Alaska Native women, Black women, and Latinas. About 1 in 4 American Indians or Alaska Native women live in poverty. The highest rate of poverty among women or men of any racial or ethnic group. Black women, Latinas, and AIAN women are also disproportionately represented among women living in poverty. While Latinas represent 18.1% of all women in the U.S. population, they constitute 27.1% of women in poverty. Similarly, Black women represent 22.3% of American women in poverty, but make up only 12.8% of all women in the U.S. population. So as you can see, it says women have higher rates of poverty than men across almost all races. These numbers don't have to lie, okay? These are the statistics. All right, almost 1 in 4 unmarried mothers with children live in poverty. So women who are unmarried is at 24.7%. Women who are unmarried without children, 16.6%. Married women with children, 5.6%. Married women without children, 5.1%. So basically, if you are married, you have less chance of experiencing high level of poverty than you are when you're unmarried as a woman. All right. So, anyways, so this is the source of information to show the poverty income level of women compared to those of men. And this is nothing surprising to me. This ain't nothing new. This is nothing new because this been going on for the longest. And it was fixated. It was fixated because of the social economic status of men and women, and because of the capitalism, because white men have put themselves in the center of being privileged amongst everybody. So This is why you have what you have today, because of the capitalism, because of the oppression, and because of the sexism and the racism that comes along with that. And as you can see, white women don't experience a higher poverty as much as black women or any other racial group of women. All right, so this information can be found on Center for American Progress, the basic facts about women in poverty. So this is not an exaggeration. This is what it is. And it's very, like, the number as far as black women making up 22.3% of women in poverty is very telling. Because if you look in our community, who do you mostly see that is the head of household? Black women. Who do you mostly see that's living in poverty? Black women. Of course, you got black men that's there too. But when we talk about head of household and that's living in the inner city, you will mostly see black women and black single parenting. So the number is not surprising at all. It's very telling, and it does speak a value. Anyways, there's something else that I want to show real fast. This one is the census as far as who is receiving benefits, government benefits. So there's always this talk that black women are the ones that's more than likely going to receive government benefits, and they are the primary recipients of welfare, right? At least that's what we've been taught. But come to find out, that's not necessarily true. So who is it? The numbers is going to be very surprising to many of us. The number is very surprising because it's really not who we think. It's not what we really think. So right here, food stamp supplemental nutrition assistance program. So let's see who received the most in food stamps. This is just food stamps right here. And this comes from the United States Census Bureau, by the way. All right, so right here it says household with one or more people in the household 60 years or over. Okay, so the estimate, that's the numbers. And the household receiving food stamps estimate, percentage household receiving food stamps. So that's 38.1%. And no people in the household 60 years or over, 61.9%. All right, you got the household type, married couples. The estimate, 23.3%. Other family, male householder, no spouse present, 8.0%. Yeah, the percentage household receiving food stamps, right? 8.0%. Females householder, no spouse present, 34.0%. Non-family household with children under 18 years of age, 46.7%. Okay. Other families, 5.1%. Female householder, no spouse present, 25.8%. All right, so check this out. Poverty status in the past 12 months. Below poverty level, 46.0%. At or above poverty level, 54.0%. Disability status, with one or more people with disability receiving food stamp, the percentage 48.2%. With no persons with disability, 51.8%. Oh, so here it is, the race. The race and Hispanic or Latino origin of household. White alone, 59.2%. Black or African American alone, 26.8%. And then all other groups, American Indian, Alaska Native, 1.6%. Asian alone, 3.0%. Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, 0.2%. Okay, white alone, not Hispanic or Latino, 45.6%. So as you can see, white alone, 59.2% is receiving food stamp. So therefore, white people are the highest of those who are receiving welfare, who's getting these food stamps, who are the food stamp recipients, not African Americans, but white people. And also, as you can see down here, white alone, not Hispanic or Latino, 45.6%. So blacks only make up 26.8% of those who are food stamp recipients. All right. Very interesting. Let's go into Bill Clinton.
Inaugural balls.
So here's Mr. Bill Clinton addressing the whole welfare reform and what's the purpose of it and what's its whole intention, etc. So I'm gonna take it out here with Bill Clinton, and then I'm gonna close it out.
This morning, President Clinton met with business executives to discuss the process of moving welfare recipients into the workplace. Before the meeting, the president spoke briefly with reporters.
We are here in the cabinet room to meet with business leaders and members of the cabinet to discuss what we all have to do together to provide jobs and training for people who will be making the transition from welfare to work as mandated by the new welfare reform law. But before we talk more about this, I want to report some good economic news. The Department of Labor reported this morning on Secretary Rice's last day on the payroll. He's ending with a bang. The report says that 11.2 million new jobs have now been created in the past 4 years. This is the first time in the history of our economy that over 11 million jobs have been created during one 4-year administration. It is a great tribute to the private sector in America. It is further evidence that our economy is strong. And finally, that our economic strategy to bring down the deficit, expand trade, and invest in our people is working. I want to thank Secretary Rice for all he has done. I also want to acknowledge there are two other outgoing members of the administration that had a great role in this economic recovery. Secretary Cantor, both as trade ambassador and as commerce secretary, and of course, Mr. Panetta, who was the OMB director at the time we adopted our economic plan. The meeting we are convening here this morning builds on the exceptional efforts that have been made over the last 4 years to allow states and local communities the freedom to test their own welfare reform strategies. Last year, I signed into law an approach that revolutionized welfare and made it a national mandate to move people who are able-bodied from welfare to work within 2 years. But as I have said repeatedly since that time, that was not the end of welfare reform. It was only the next step. Now we have to launch a national effort in every state and every community to make sure that the jobs are there for people who have to make the transition from welfare to work. As a first step in that effort, every state has to tailor a welfare reform plan that requires and rewards work, imposes time limits, increases child care payments, and demands personal responsibility. We've already given the green light to 26 of our states to carry out the welfare reform plans they have designated. Today, I'm pleased to announce that 3 more states, Louisiana, Maryland, and North Carolina, have been given approval to implement their plans. The steps we've taken over the last 4 years, working with individual states and communities, have helped to reduce the welfare rolls by 2.1 million people. Those efforts and the stronger economy have led to the biggest reduction in welfare rolls in the history of this country. But welfare reform now must go on to the next step, and it cannot succeed by government action alone. There cannot be, in our efforts to balance the budget, enough money to have some big public works program here to put everyone to work who is required to move into the workforce within 2 years. So welfare reform, if it's going to work, will have to have the leadership of the private sector in turning welfare checks into paychecks. Now, our balanced budget plan has provisions in it to support the business community in helping to create 1 million more jobs. But today, we are going to meet with these business leaders to talk about what specifically they and others can do to help to move people from welfare to work, and also to talk about what they can do to help make sure that the states and the communities in this country have actually designed plans that will be attractive to the private sector in helping businesses of all sizes, not just larger businesses, to move from welfare to work. And I might also add nonprofit organizations who are also eligible to participate in these initiatives. Just a few days ago, we had our annual prayer breakfast here, and I challenged the religious organizations as employers to participate in this program. So a number of these companies represented around this table have already been very active in this. We're going to have a good meeting, and I look forward to success. But I do want to make it clear to the American people that welfare reform law did not put anybody to work. Unless we can create new jobs in the private sector within the 2-year timeline, the welfare reform effort will not succeed. And we're depending on the leaders around this table, people like them throughout America, to help us to achieve that goal.
Mr. President, do you think there's a right-wing cabal in the private field?
No.
Mr. President, are you concerned that the purely legal question that goes to the Supreme Court on Monday in your civil case will become a pretext for calling out the whole story again and causing you more difficulty?
I don't have any control over what anyone else does. I can only control what I do. It's not going to cause me any difficulty because I'm going to do my job here.
Mr. President, you referred to the jobs figures that came out earlier today. It's good news. As you're aware, not only was the December report pretty strong, but the October and November report were revised upwards. Are you concerned at all that this strike may signal a building up of inflationary pressures in the economy?
No, based on the conversation I had with Chairman Greenspan last week, that's one of the things, or I guess earlier this week, one of the things that he noted, and Secretary Rubin and I were there, was that
There's Bill Clinton talking about the welfare reform, and whatnot. So the whole thing about the welfare reform was basically supposed to give more opportunity for people that's on welfare, there are welfare recipients, the opportunity to have jobs and go through training programs. Now, at one point in time, when somebody applied for welfare, they were able to be a long-time recipient. They was able to be on there for a long period of time with no problem, without any obligation, until they was able, if they was able to find work, then they can get off the assistance. But if they were not able to find anything, then they can stay on the assistance for a long. So it was a long-term effect. However, when the 1996 bill came around, that's when Bill Clinton said, okay, well, we're going to make this a temporary assistance for the needy family. All right. So that means that these families that are currently receiving government assistance, they're going to only be on there for temporary. So if you're getting a welfare check for your child or for your children, you're only going to be on it for temporary. So while in the meantime, while you receiving that, you either have to find work or you have to be in some type of job training program. If not, then what the government can do is reduce the amount of welfare that a person that's the head of the household receiving. They can reduce the amount of money, or they can just go ahead and completely cut the person off of welfare. They can do that because they are after all, they're providing it, so they can take a person off if they're not doing the obligation. So yeah, so that's the whole ordeal. But there's the pros and the cons to that. Yeah, the pros is there were former recipients who was able to gain employment opportunity, and then there are those who still haven't seek any form of employment, so they fall back to what they know. So it doesn't really help or benefit everybody. Certain groups of people sees benefits off of the whole welfare reform of 1996, and there's those who have not received much benefit from it. All right, but anyways, I'm going to go ahead and log off. So I hope everybody have a good one. Until next time, peace and power elevation. This is your girl Tiffany, and I'm checking out.